Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
My name is Josh Sweeney, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about behavior analytics for entrepreneurs. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Prototype Prime for this beautiful podcasting booth. If you're not familiar with Prototype Prime, they're a technology co-working space in Peachtree Corners, Georgia, and I recommend that you give them a chance and take a look at their amazing space. So, behavior analytics for entrepreneurs, what does that mean? What are we digging down into? Today, we're going to dig down into what, from a personality profile, from a behavior perspective, how do you know if entrepreneurs are born, if entrepreneurs are made, and then what are the other nuances around entrepreneurship that you need to know if you are an entrepreneur or would like to be an entrepreneur? So, we worked with DNA Behavior in order to do a lot of heavy data analysis around the personality of an entrepreneur. We found some very interesting takeaways. You've heard me talk about the Entrepreneur Organization on other podcasts. And what we did was we took the personality test along with DNA, our partner, DNA Behavior, and we gave this test to hundreds of entrepreneurs. Now, this test and this assessment's been used over 25 million times, but we're not tracking titles and all of this other information unless a customer wants us to, and unless they're working with one of our organizations on that. So we specifically went out and found hundreds of entrepreneurs in the EO organization to take this assessment so that we could find out whether entrepreneurs are born, whether they're made, how the partnership structures what it look like, and what are the nuances of that. And we came to some very interesting results. Again, all data-backed results. Now, one thing to keep in mind is in this analysis, we're looking at entrepreneurs that have built $1 million plus businesses. So to get into EO, you have to have $1 million in revenue. You have to be a founding member, majority shareholder. And what a lot of people don't know is that's only about 4% of businesses founded in the U.S. So it's a very, very small group. We're used to seeing the Googles and the Facebooks and everything, and we tend to think there's all these large companies, but proportionally, again, only 4% ever make it to $1 million in revenue that are founded. In the data that we uncover, or what we uncovered in this data was, first of all, there's differences between an entrepreneur that goes at it alone and an entrepreneur that goes at this at entrepreneurship, at building a business with a partner. The first thing we found is going back to our quadrants that we use in our system. You know, if you think of a piece of pizza cut into 4 slices, you have a top left, a top right, a bottom left, and a bottom right quadrant. 41% of entrepreneurs that we interviewed or we gave this assessment to were what are called initiators. They're in that top left quadrant. So what we found was out of the hundreds of people that we surveyed with this personality test, 41% of these businesses that were $1 million plus, their founders were a very specific profile. And then after that, we found that 13% were what are called strategists and 18% were influencers. Now, the interesting thing here is both strategist, influencer, or all three, strategist, influencer, and initiators are all in the top left quadrant of our assessment. So in a way, you know, that leads you to believe, well, in a certain aspect, entrepreneurs are born, right? These are the people who grew $1 million plus businesses, many of them on their own, bootstrapped and went out and did that. So there are some very strong traits that lead to success of building $1 million company when you're born an entrepreneur in this case. And what we found is we even went one level higher and we looked at the data for the people that took the assessment that were 10 million plus in revenue. And they had 3 distinct behaviors around risk and how pioneering and other factors that they were that took them into the $10 million territory. So there was even stronger scores in very specific areas of the assessment for those founders that went to $10 million. So that begs the question, well, are they born or made? Well, we had a whole nother cohort of people that fell out of those quadrants, out of that top left quadrant. Plenty of other entrepreneurs in all three other quadrants. Well, what was the commonality there? Well, we started to find that, well, one, there was definitely a smaller portion of them. So certain personality profiles are going to lead to building that $1 million plus companies. But the other profiles we started to see some trends, and we're still working on additional data around this. We started to see some trends about people who were outside of that profile taking a more collaborative approach and having a partner. So what you can get done with two people oftentimes is going to far outweigh what you can get done with one, if they're born with that personality to go achieve these certain results. So again, there are entrepreneurs that come from many walks of life and many behavior profiles. In this instance, it doesn't necessarily say you are or you aren't. What you're really looking for is what action should you take and what path should you take based on your personality. So if you're an initiator on our profile, or you're in that top left quadrant, and you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to grow $1 million plus business, then your outlook is pretty good to go achieve that result on your own and through adding employees. Now, if you are in that quadrant or in that top left quadrant, you're an initiator, but you want to build something less than $1 million, that should actually be even easier. Statistically, it's easier to build a company less than $1 million from what we've seen in our success rates in the US. Now, if you're outside of that, again, we had a large distribution of people that were over $1 million, but most of them went out and found a co-founder that would complement them in their business. So where does that get congruent, incongruent? Where are the challenges? Well, what we look for when we're doing personality assessments is strong incongruent situations that you need to know about. So what do I mean by incongruent? Let's say that you are not in the top left quadrant. You don't have the typical $1 million plus single founder profile, and yet you want to go take on venture capital. Venture capital is going to make you move a lot faster, a lot higher risk, a lot more at stake in a lot of ways, all these different things that have to be taken care of and mended. And your profile outside of that top left quadrant is going to be a much slower pace. So taking on venture capital and growing a 10 million, 100 million, or in this case, VC money is going to be $100 million plus company, is going to be incongruent with your personality profile. So you're going to want to have co-founders in place or other founders in place to make that happen. If you said, well, I'm going to take on venture capital, I'm not in the top left quadrant, and I'm doing it on my own, or I'm going to take any sort of investment, and I'm going to be forced to grow at a rate of speed, then I'm going to look at that at a profile level and say, that's going to be your biggest struggle. It is incongruent with your personality profile. Now, there's other ways that this is a strong benefit. So I'll share a little story about myself. When I joined the Entrepreneur Organization Accelerator program, I went from $250 to $1 million in a year and a half very quickly. And I was rolling the dice very often. I have a high risk profile. And at any point in time, if something would have gone catastrophically wrong, we might have gone out of business. So I was taking a very high risk approach in order to get to the goal that I had as quickly as possible. Whereas somebody that's not that profile, somebody that's not the top left quadrant like I am, or the initiator profile, is going to take a lot more time doing that. They're going to do it in a more orderly fashion. It's not going to happen in a year and a half. Generally not going to go from 250 to $1 million in a year and a half unless you have a high risk tolerance. They're going to do it in 3, 4, 5. I met some individuals who've done it in 8 years, but they're going to do it at a much more sustained speed. So again, there isn't really a perfect profile, like what we tell our customers. There isn't necessarily a good or a bad profile. There is a profile that is good or bad based on the role, based on who you are and how you want to get there. And in this case, in entrepreneurship, there is a better profile for certain situations than others. So in this, just think about if you are an entrepreneur, if you want to be an entrepreneur, the biggest task here is understand what type of entrepreneur you are, at what rate of speed you want to grow, and based on that rate of speed, is it going to be better for you to go at it alone and retain more ownership and reach that? Or is it going to be better to have a co-founder that balances you out and gets you there in the way that you're comfortable with based on your personality profile?
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.